Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Today is Wednesday, August 7th. Is that right? August 7th, 2024. We are gathered for a work session. This particular work session, the topic is update performance measures regarding the various departments that are included in our community planning infrastructure and resources service area. Thank you all for being here. My name is John Kafalis, Commissioner from District 1, joined by my Commissioner colleagues, Kristen Stevens, District 2, Jody Shattuck McNally, District 3, Lorinda Volk, our County Manager. I wonder if you want to say a word or two to cue it up, then I believe we might turn it over to either Leslie or Rebecca.
I think this is the next in a series of performance measure updates we're giving you ahead of the budget process. This is, I think, the fourth or fifth one of these that you all have done per service area. So, Matt, are you being Julie today? And so, do we hand it over to you or to Leslie?
Sure. Yeah, I can do a little introduction. As a reminder, we show a lot of different charts and graphs with different colors, and some of them are performance measures that actually measure how well we're doing something, how effective or efficient we are. But there's also community indicators. That's data that we respond to, that we monitor, and we track closely. And I think that's all I will say about that. Julie Elser is at another meeting, is excused, so I'm filling in for her. Normally she would be running this, but turn it over to Leslie and her team.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Leslie Ellis, Community Planning, Infrastructure, and Resources Director. So I have the pleasure to have all the directors from the various departments here with you today to showcase some of the fine work that they do on behalf of the community. And we'll basically just go in order that you see on the screen up here in alphabetical order through the different departments to explain what they've learned about the performance measures in each of those service areas. And we'll start with community development, so I'll just pass it along.
If I may, Leslie, as a gentle reminder, please bring the mic a tiny bit closer.
Yes.
Especially if you're mild-mannered and soft-spoken. That would help.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to Rebecca to start with. Thank you very much.
All right. Good afternoon. Rebecca Everett, Community Development Director. So I'll start with the performance measures that we report on the countywide dashboard, and then I have some additional data to share on development and building trends that we are seeing and volumes that we're seeing in the community development divisions. So the two metrics that you see on the right-hand side of the screen relate to the speed and efficiency of our processes. They're both a bit of a snapshot of a single type of application in both building and planning, so they don't necessarily represent every type of building permit that we have or every type of planning case that we have. We've picked kind of representative case types to use for this metric. So the top metric shows the average number of business days that it takes the county to review a residential building permit application from permit application to issuance. That number is slightly down in 2023 compared to 2022, which is good. We want to be under the dotted line on that metric. We want to be completing those reviews more quickly. So the average time for a residential building permit application review was 19 days last year. Similarly, on the planning side, we're looking at the average number of business days for a land division application to get through the process. Again, this doesn't necessarily reflect every type of planning case. We know there's a huge variety there. Some have statutory deadlines that we complete more quickly. Some can take much longer to get through the process. But a typical land division application is getting through our process in about 105 business days. These are not calendar days, but business days. And that number is down for 2023 compared to the last 3 years before that. So I hope that means that we're making some progress on a lot of the process efficiencies and process improvements that we've been working to make both in building and planning to see both of those numbers down. It could also be a function of some shifts in workload and reduction in number of applications we're seeing. And so I'll share that as well. The middle metric, I won't dwell too much on. It really just reflects how many building inspections we're completing within 24 hours of the request. And we are at 99% for last year, which is great, and that's pretty stable compared to the prior years too. We do a really good job of processing all of those building inspections the next day after we receive them. Then finally, on the right-hand side represents some code compliance data. We are working on some more detailed metrics and a dashboard specifically for code compliance, but the data point that you see here is the percent of code compliance cases that were closed compared to the number. So we took the number of new code compliance cases opened in 2023, the number of cases that were closed, and so that percentage is a function of how many cases were closed in relation to how many were open. So you see that number starting to trend upward, which is also good. That means we're hopefully closing cases, a little bit more quickly in comparison to how many cases we're opening. So I'm going to steal the cord here and show quickly a few other metrics that may be relevant.
Rebecca?
Let's see if it shifts on screen.
Rebecca,
Yes.
before you do that, let's pause for a moment and see if my colleagues have any questions or comments on these particular
Okay.
slides,
Right.
if that's all right.
Go back.
Colleagues, do you have any questions or comments? Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rebecca, I don't know if we can go back to the code compliance cases closed. I know some cases are complex and take a long time, and then there's some that are pretty quick. So that metric, is all of them?
Yes, this is a very coarse metric that really just looks at total new code compliance cases that were created in 2023 and total cases that were closed in 2023. It doesn't necessarily mean that every case that was opened in 2023 was closed within that same year. It's not really a reflection of how much time things are taking in the process. It's really just looking in aggregate how many new cases were opened and how many cases were closed.
Going forward, do you feel there might be a better way to show the amount of volume and work and complexity code compliance is doing, or do you think that's necessary? I'm just, because I know some of these are pretty straightforward cases, but some are pretty complex and want to reflect kind of, how much work and capacity is going into those, because I think there's some that are really requiring a lot of heavy lifting, for the cases are complex, as you know. But I'm just curious about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, our code compliance team is working with Julie Elser's group on a full dashboard of more detailed metrics for code compliance. That's not ready yet. It has taken a lot of time to identify and extract the data that we need to build up that dashboard, but we are looking at things like number of code cases that come in within certain priority levels or certain categories. We will have some time metrics of looking at how long it takes to close certain types of cases, and starting to assess where's the bulk of the workload in code compliance, which cases really are the most complex, and some other metrics that will help us visualize that workload a little bit more in a richer way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Commissioner Stevens?
I'm okay. I don't have any questions. Thank you.
You're good? I have a question, Rebecca. And that is regarding the building inspection requests honored within one day. Are we, I seem to recall during COVID, we were having to pivot a little bit, and I believe we had figured out a way to do building inspections remotely. Are we still doing that, or are they all in person?
All of our building inspections are in person.
So we got rid of that?
Yeah, so
because-
we still have the capability to do that if needed, but because we're able to honor those inspections in person within 24 hours, it's a much better inspection that can be conducted on site to actually physically see what's happening out there.
24-hour turnaround, if I may do a follow-up, the 24-hour turnaround, does that include travel time? Because it seems like some of these inspections could be to the far reaches of the county, and that would take longer.
Yeah, I mean, this reflects kind of a next day inspection. So if you call in an inspection today, you're 99% guaranteed that an inspector will be on your property tomorrow to do that inspection. And we do design or draw the map of inspection areas to account for travel time. So some inspectors have a much smaller area that they cover, recognizing that it'll take a lot longer to get there. And others cover all of the Fort Collins area, for example, because it's much quicker to get around.
Excellent. Thank you for answering my questions. Please proceed.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, I don't actually have a link to the Zoom meeting. Oh, okay. If I just share. Okay. Sorry, one moment. Apologize to my colleagues for taking some of the time here. But I want to be able to just share a couple additional data points because I think it's relevant, especially as you're considering budget and thinking about planning for next year. So starting with our building division, building activity, this is a trend line from 2006 to 2023, so it's long-term data. The top line shows the number of building permits that we are taking in a given year, and the bottom line is the number of plan reviews that we conduct. These numbers are different because not every building permit requires a full plan review. Things like a water heater or a new furnace or something like that, we don't do a plan review of it. You just get a permit over the counter. So I just want to note that we, in 2023, did see a dip in our building permit data. We are seeing that start to stabilize and trend flat so far for this year, for 2024. So we're not sure that that's necessarily a downward trend. We did have a couple of high years for building permits with a lot of county projects and big commercial projects, but I do want to point out that that is the data point for 2023. Inspections, meanwhile, this next chart shows number of inspections that were done. Those were up in 2023. The inspections happen at the end of the process. That kind of reflects the bump that was happening in 2021 and 2022 in construction as those inspections, as there was follow through on those inspections. And then the third stat that's really important for us to track in building is the revenue, the amount of the fees that we're taking in for building permits, which reflects the complexity and the overall volume of the workload that's coming in, because sometimes we have a lot of smaller permits that don't necessarily generate as much revenue because they don't take as much time to review. Our revenue is down compared to 2022, but slightly above 2021 for last year. So again, 2021, 2022, we had a kind of an increase in activity over what we expected. So that's not a concerning drop at this time. It's still overall an upward trend. I'll kind of move on to a couple other stats. Code compliance workload, this is just looking at the number of code cases opened and the number of code cases closed for just 22 and 2023. So you can just see we opened fewer cases in 2023. We closed fewer cases too, but that was a function of not opening as many cases. So we did see a reduction in the number of code compliance cases last year. And then on the planning side, there are two lines on this chart as well, the number of inquiries that came in and the number of cases. Inquiries usually are a good indicator of future workload that's coming through planning. We did make some process improvements last year that resulted in that downward that drop in data that you see there. So really, I wouldn't rely too much on that drop in inquiries from 2023. We've made some process changes. The better line to look at is the bottom dark blue line, which shows that it does appear to be a slight downward trend in planning applications from 2021 on. The number is still higher than what we saw in 2019 and 2020. So and that number could stabilize. It isn't worrisome for us at this moment, but it is something that we're taking a close look at and paying close attention to on a monthly basis. And then finally, the types of planning cases, in case you're curious, and as you are probably aware, a large volume of our planning cases right now fall into either the short-term rental category or administrative special reviews, which may or may not end up in a public hearing. Some of those go to me for a decision. But we also have a high volume of smaller projects like variances and lot consolidations and things like that. So that's just a snapshot. And I'm happy to provide these slides if any of you would like to see these separately. And I will stop there and make sure my colleagues have plenty of time to share their information as well.
Thank you, Rebecca, and I suspect all three of us would like the slides. Commissioner Stevens, you had your...
Yeah, inflation and high interest rates are probably part of the reason, or maybe most of the reason that those numbers are lower or flattening. Is that what you're thinking? And do you expect them to rebound a little bit if the Fed lowers interest rates and things?
Yes and yes. Yeah, interest rates is not a perfect indicator of planning and building activity, but it's a pretty good one. We're looking at some ways to better tie our data to be able to project and forecast based on what the interest rate looks like. But yes, if we see that interest rate come down, we do expect to see more people taking on house projects or building new homes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shaddock McNally, do you have anything?
No. This time I might later. Thank you.
I have a question. And that is, it seems like there's quite a number of building permit all kinds of applications. What is the methodology that you use to help distribute some of that caseload? How does that work? And I know with the code compliance folks, they have different geographic areas, but in terms of planners, in terms of inspectors, people who are processing these applications, how do you decide who does what?
Yeah, it's more of an art than a science, and the supervisors for each of those teams really assign that work. On the building permit side, the plans examiners have different areas of specialty. Some have a lot of experience with commercial permits. Some spend more time on decks and basement finishes and smaller projects, so it might vary based on their experience. On the planning side, similarly, more complex cases tend to go to senior planners. Variances and smaller cases tend to go to the more junior planners.
And you must have a way, if some of those land use applications are, for example, 1041 permit applications, which can be a bit time consuming, I guess you figured out how to, because that particular person, or I'm sure it's a team, a lot of their time would be devoted to that, and that puts more responsibility and workload on other folks. Any comments there?
There's a constant kind of shifting and adaptation to respond to the workload that comes in, because in community development, we have very little control over the workload that comes to us. We're constantly working on strategies to make sure that workload's evenly distributed.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank
I
you.
believe now we can move on to engineering.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mark Peterson, Engineering Director. The measures we report for engineering, I know, are very exciting and keep you on the edge of your seat. But we basically are looking at the condition of our bridge system, capacity on our road network, and then there's a safety, it's a rate goal. So we're looking at the number of, or the rate of severe crashes, which are defined as crashes having an injury or a fatality relative to the volume on the county road system. So the first measure that's up there is the severe crash rate on the far left. The target is keeping it below 31. You can see in 2022 we went above that line and then we've come back down. We'll be coming to you next week to next Monday, we're actually going to update you on the outcome of our annual safety report. So there are a lot of performance indicators or measurements that are applied to look at safety on our road system. So we'll be giving you a lot more detail there. This is just the one metric that's used to describe that area of activity and responsibility that we have on the road system. The middle one on the top, percentage of roads that are have free flow traffic capacity. That's tied to a volume to capacity ratio, underlies that calculation. So it's related to the volume of traffic on the road relative to its capacity. And so we see changes in that when we do a project that widens a roadway and adds shoulders, or for example, on the County Road 17 project that we did up north, from Willix up to 287, we added turn lanes, or, we've added capacity both in terms of the shoulders as well as if you add a center turn lane, you've potentially doubled the capacity of a road to carry traffic. So we have seen, the target was to stay at or above 88%. We've seen some degradation of that. That's somewhat a reflection of funding availability or what we can apply to make capacity improvements on our road network. That ratio is always influenced to a slight degree by what annexations take place, and when we lose road segments, the volume to capacity associated with that segment, comes off our metric. The number of bridges on mainline roads that are structurally deficient is really a holdover measure. It's one we probably should retire. It was a goal in the prior strategic plan to get that to zero, if possible, over the term of that plan. It's one where we get a major bridge inspection every 2 years. So with an aging system, you can address one bridge and you're just likely to see a new one pop onto the list and become structurally deficient. Again, it's a somewhat obsolete measure. There's 2 bridges out of the more than 200 major structures that are in that category. The current ones are over irrigation canals. I think it's County Road 17 north of 287 and on County Road 52 east of the interstate. Then the more current bridge deck measure that we're out to use are in those 2 plots on the right side, and it's calculations of the percentage of the bridge deck area, the surface area of the bridge deck that's either in good condition or poor condition. There are basically 3 categories used: good, fair, poor. So we're really looking at the kind of 2 ends of the spectrum. We did discover that the number being reported in prior performance measures didn't jibe with what was in the spreadsheet, so we've revised all the numbers in there. We're above the goal target of 40% in terms of bridge deck area that's classified as good, in good condition, and then we're well above the target, or we've got far less bridge deck area that's in poor condition than, we want to keep it below 10%. We're down in the 2% range. Again, we do have an aging, bridge inventory, and there are certainly plenty of structures that need work in the future. Some of them are capacity related, some of them are functionally obsolete. In other words, they were constructed as a bridge to carry just 2 lanes of traffic. They have no pedestrian facilities, no bikeable shoulders. So there's always the need to address those kinds of structures, and it really does go back to the need for additional funding to support addressing those needs. Be happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mark. Colleagues, do you have any questions or comments? Commissioner, do you?
Thanks, Mark. I guess to the percentage of county roads providing free flow of traffic. This kind of aligns with the conversation that we're talking about with the funding for transportation, and this measure shows kind of the consistent kind of issue for since even before we were on the board. So I I'm assuming that this is being used for that conversation and other metrics to kind of even show more in depth the challenges, or is this not applicable to the needs or the challenges that we're facing as a county?
It's not been used so far to get into the, numeric numbers, or we haven't utilized this to really address the needs for funding directly. Really, it comes into play in terms of looking at roads that need to be, we have graphics coming out of our transportation master plan that identify roads that need capacity improvements. So we've got that on a, on a map scale, and we've got it defined down to the road segments. So it's better, in my view, to kind of give them specific examples or talk to the needs that are out there on the system, as opposed to just a graphic that's showing a decline or an increase.
Okay.
The other thing to note, and this is probably a little tough to explain, but the change is based on sort of fitting a bell curve to our road system as it existed back in the late 2000s. So we're sort of showing a change in time on volume to capacity on our road system relative to a snapshot back when it was 88%. So it's a relative measure, and I don't know that people would relate to that real well in terms of identifying a need that they can, again, directly relate to. We need improvements to County Road 17 between Fort Collins and Loveland because, we're reaching capacity there.
Okay, that's helpful, and that's a good insight. And then to the severe crash rate on county roads. That, I just want to clarify, a clarifying question. That's only on county-maintained roads, not state highways?
Correct. This is only our mainline unincorporated road system.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yeah, I mean, Commissioner Shattuck McKinley was kind of answered my question, but I'll ask it maybe. With the free flow of traffic metric, would you anticipate that would keep going lower without funding? I mean, is that, and is 88% picked as a metric because people start feeling it at a certain point?
No, and see, that's where this one's maybe a little challenging to explain, because
Okay.
the 88% was what we had in the system at that point in time. So that was sort of the measure to show,
Okay.
are we maintaining
Are we getting worse?
or are we losing
Okay.
capacity in the system?
Gotcha.
I mean, when you go into a master planning process like we're doing now, you tend to look at volume to capacity from the standpoint of the roads that are reaching their capacity threshold, where you need to do something more to increase their capacity. And so that typically is in the point where you have a volume to capacity ratio of about 0.85. People start to feel like they're on a congested roadway. And county roads, our standards are, we try to maintain a slightly higher level of service because people expect to have more free-flowing movement when you're on a rural road than in an urban setting when you're potentially more congested and more stop-and-go kind of conditions.
I mean, are there many ways to do it without increasing the road capacity? I mean, I know like some of the technology can be used to sort of time lights and do different kinds of things like that, but that's probably less effective on these kind of roads because there's not necessarily traffic lights or things like that.
Yeah, we really,
Can't really do much beyond.
at the county level, we have a handful of signals.
Sure.
that we
So
operate.
there's nothing really, so these roads kind of would need funding and expansion. I mean, do you see a lot of, is there a lot of value in that sort of center lane that, or Or do you really need to build an additional, like, lane on each side kind of
You certainly
situation?
gain capacity where you've got a center lane and you have access points.
Okay,
So if you're giving somebody a place to
To
make a
turn
left
into-
turn, you're
yeah.
not backing up traffic and creating an unsafe condition
sure.
with rear end crashes. So you
Right.
do
So it does.
increase the capacity from that standpoint.
Thank you. I think that's all I have.
Thank you. So, very quickly, that center graph that we're talking about, I mean, another way of saying that, Mark, is that the lower the percent of county roads providing free flow of traffic, the lower that percentage, the more traffic congestion we have.
Yeah, you're getting more, I don't know if congestion is, the right word, but you're moving towards a more congested experience. You have more vehicles traveling on those same segments of road without capacity having been added to offset that increase in traffic.
Are there only three ABC? Aren't there?
Well, no, I mean, it's ABC is where we're saying you've got more free flow conditions. There's D and F in terms of
That's what I
the other
thought.
end of the spectrum.
And we have some roads that are DNF.
We have some that are certainly over capacity that would be in that high capacity. I mean, again, Taft Hill Road between Horsetooth and Harmony is one of those examples. You've got a 3-lane road carrying over 20,000 trips a day on it. It gets pretty congested,
Thank you. Colleagues, anything else for engineering? Lorinda, anything? Shall we move on?
Good afternoon, Dalen Figgs, Director for Natural Resources. And we have three metrics I want to report on today. The first one is our land conservation metric, followed by a metric we use to really outline visitor experience. And then last, really a capital maintenance metric that really applies to the work we're doing to maintain our facilities. So for our land conservation, our goal is to conserve a total of 74,000 acres by 2043. 2043 is when our current sales tax, help preserve open space, expires. So by the end of this year, the end of 2023, we've conserved just a little under 7,000 acres toward that goal from a baseline of 50,000 acres. This is done in partnership, so the math is a little weird. We take a kind of a proportional share of the lands conserved. And so right now we're 29% on our way to meeting our goal, and we're about 20% into the time frame that we're working within. And if you remember a few years ago, we decided to front load as much acquisition as we could while land was available and the prices were still reasonably low. So that strategy shown here is working as well. So we're working well on our way to meeting our goal of 74,000 acres. We currently have about a 70-30 split. 70% of our land is in fee title, about 30% is in conservation easement. That's not necessarily a metric that we have a goal around. I think it just reflects the ability for us to conserve land through conservation easements at a much lower cost. And I think as we get closer to our total goal of 75 to 74,000 acres, it'll be closer to a 60-40 or a 50-50 split just through the financial components of all that. Our next goal is around our trails, and it's the percent of natural surface trails maintained at a B level or greater. And you'll see this is where we dropped off in 2023. So we rate our trails every fall and winter, A through F. And so you can see here, we did go from 93% to 63%. And if you remember, the spring of 23 was a very wet, a lot of intense thunderstorms happened that year. And so we saw a lot of trail washout. And so we definitely did have a trail system that was damaged from that, reflected in that 63% score. So in response, we have added a second trail crew in this year, 2024, to really bring that back up. So we still have new trails we're building. We didn't want to turn our back on trail maintenance, and so we're working hard in both areas. I expect to see this come back up into the green next year. And then our last metric that reflects really our capital maintenance is one built around asphalt management. We stole this one from Road and Bridge, and it really is to stay within that 75 to 85% of the PCI, and I think Todd can explain that far better than I can. And so we are in that green area, and it really reflects a new focus on capital maintenance, making sure that we're taking care of the facilities that we have, and working along the lines to do that. So those are the three metrics we have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Colleagues, questions or comments? Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Dalen. So I've been out driving some of those and with staff and everything. So besides the trailheads, also, it seems like some of the parking lots and some of the campgrounds, I've been up enjoying and paying my fees, enjoying some of the areas. Is that also, so that's not reflected here too, some of the road, I mean, there's some great roads and great maintenance, but some of the roads, just the washout is, and so that's my first question, is that's not included in this metric?
Yep, this is the paved side of our system. And so, yes, we do have a series of gravel roads that we maintain as well. We don't have a metric tied to those, but I think they're the same general trends that we see in the paved side. We're working on the gravel side. The one thing I do want to add is we have a fairly large capital project starting in '25 that will convert some of our more difficult to maintain roads to asphalt. We have at least on the federal side of the properties we manage, so Carter Lake and Horsetooth, so we'll be able to make some improvements there by paving some of the graveled areas we currently have.
If I might ask another question. So with conditions like they were last year, I know you have some rate signs that talks about, mud season, stay on the trail and everything. How is that, I've got muddy boots on at the moment. So I'm just curious, how much, with the increase in users, how much is this also besides the weather conditions that some of our fantastic visitors and residents maybe are maybe not always using best leave no trace practices and kind of exacerbating the issues? Just curious about that.
There certainly is that component, and we work hard through our messaging around leave no trace, walk through the mud if the trail's open, those messages, and I think they're fairly effective. We have a visitor base that's very accustomed to sort of the rules of being outdoors. It doesn't always work. We always have folks who choose to do something different. The damage that we saw shown in this graph were really, high precipitation event related, but those are difficult because once the trail begins to wash out, people begin to step off to the side of the trail and create a new one. And so we have kind of a damage to a trail and then the start of a new trail that we don't want to see either one of those.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate your work.
Yep, thank you.
Commissioner Stevens, anything?
No, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Regarding trail conditions, how do we remind me again, Dalen, how do we inform the public that either the trails are closed because of the conditions? I know there are some apps out there like Cotrex, but maybe you could speak to that a tiny bit.
Absolutely, thank you. Cotrex is a great tool for us. It's a statewide app that the public agencies have agreed to use, and so that is a primary way of informing folks with trail conditions. If we close a trail or have unusual circumstances, we do aggressively pursue social media, press release, posting on our website as well. It's a little more immediate. Reach out to our community. At Cotrex, you have to go find, and at least we can push information out to the public through social media. It finds them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like we can move on.
Okay. Todd Jurgens, Road and Bridge Director. Good afternoon. We've got 3 performance measures that I think do a really good job of just measuring how the funds are being spent. And, Road and Bridge does a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, it's the condition of the road, the non-paved roads, the paved roads, and then obviously a large piece of what we do in the winter is snow and ice control. So our first performance measure is the average surface condition of our non-paved system. That's measured as a pavement condition index, or PCI, on a scale of 1 to 100. Our goal is to stay between 80 and 90. And you can see we have a fairly long history of staying right in that band. The one thing to note with non-paved roads is it really is a snapshot in time. A non-paved road changes condition quickly. So generally, it's going to be 100 or near 100 the day after we grade and treat the road, and then it's going to start to degrade every day until we come back. And the rate of degradation is affected by weather, it's affected by traffic volumes, it's affected by the quality of the surfacing material that is on the road. So, the programs for maintaining those roads are grading and treating, but we also re-gravel non-paved roads as they need it. We lose road base to the slopes and ditches during the winter when we're plowing. Traffic will push that material off the road over time, and so every one of those roads is going to need additional gravel added at some point in its life, and we do inspections routinely to kind of measure the depth of the base. We've got a program that's put together that prioritizes the roads that need re-graveled. We have a reclamation program, so some of the issues that we'll see with the surfacing material is just I want to say we've worn the surface of the road out. So a typical gravel road has 6 to 8 inches of road base on it. When we grade it, we're dealing with the top 1.5 to 2 inches. And we do that over and over and over its life, and we start to wear the surface out. And so rather than re-gravel the road, which is what we did historically, we have some equipment now that allows us to reclaim the road, essentially an industrial rototiller that goes on the front of a loader, and we blend that entire section of road base back together and reconstitute it. If we're lacking fines in the road, which is what helps hold the aggregate and hold the dust suppressant, we may actually drop down into the underlying soil a little bit and bring some of that up, but it obviously much cheaper than importing aggregate and resurfacing the road. But again, I think the thing to keep in mind is that snapshot in time. The regularity at which we come back and grade the road is really what has an effect. Generally, we grade roads 3 times a year, and all of our roads that have gravel on them get treated with dust suppressant, and that typically happens twice a year. So coming out of winter, we'll make a round through the county and we just grade, water, and roll. We don't apply any dust suppressant, try to get through the spring rains, and then we start another round where we're grading and treating. And then we complete that round around the county, and then going into winter, so that late summer, fall timeframe, we're putting one more grading and treating on the roads to get them ready for winter. And hopefully at that point they freeze and hold down through the winter. So any questions on non-paved, or do you want me to go through all of these? And
Thank you, Todd. Let's go through the remainder, and then we'll
Okay.
certainly
Fair
ask
enough.
questions or comments, offer comments.
Okay, so the next performance measure is the pavement condition index on paved roads. Again, a scale of 1 to 100, and our target is 75 to 85. Right now, we're sitting at an 88. That's starting to trend down. So there's a couple things to explain, and we've explained this each year. In 2016, we changed the inspection methodology with which the roads were being inspected. Historically, we had hired a group of interns out of CSU. The engineering department worked with those interns, trained them up, and it was boots on the ground inspections following the inspection protocols, and we came up with our PCIs. In 2016, we hired a company, IMS, that came in with automated equipment, the van set up with cameras and lasers, and everything was done at rated speed on the road. And what we were seeing was an increase in our PCIs with no work really being done to the road. It got better over a year. And I've been doing this a long time. That doesn't generally happen. So what we recognized, it was a difference in the inspection methodology. And so we go, okay, we need to understand what's going on here. And then in 2020, we switched again. What really happened with IMS at that last year, they changed some of their technology and they weren't able to see cracks in roads that had been chip sealed. So there's enough texture in the chip seal that the lasers were unable to see the cracks in the road. So we had these really high PCIs, and Brian Fraken in engineering helps manage that, and we worked through that. And what we recognized is that wasn't going to work for us anymore. So now we've hired a consultant, and we're back to boots on the ground rather than us managing it with interns. And we have a consultant doing that work, but we are back to actually folks walking the road and physically rating it. What goes into pavement condition is, the level of cracking in the road, lane shoulder drop off, ride quality, rutting depth in the road. I'm going to get this wrong, but I want to say there's like 20 different defects that get rated with a paved road, and they all go in to create the PCI. There are a couple changes that we're making right now. So historically, we've chip sealed on a 7-year cycle. We have the county broken into 7 zones, and zone 1 being Estes Park, and then 2, 3, 4 is with 7 being Red Feather. We come back around to 1, and the roads in each zone got chip sealed on a 7-year cycle. We've been watching that for a while. And we really feel like we can get a few more years of life out of those chip seals. We took a couple roads over the last, say, 5 years, and tried to see if we could get 14 years. So we just skipped a few roads that I thought were in pretty good shape, and I wanted to see if they would last essentially 2 rounds. They didn't last 2 rounds. But what we think is we can get about 9 years of life out of those. So this fall and this winter, we're going to work to rebalance the county, break it into 9 zones rather than 7, and see if we can get some more life. I think it'll have a slight impact on the PCIs on the roads, but that's okay. The numbers show that we can drop a few points and still be in a good place, and it'll save the taxpayer dollars if we can eke a couple more years out of that. Nothing's forever. We're going to try it, and if we see more negative results than we expect, we can always make an adjustment again. But those are some of the things that we're looking at there. And then our last performance measure is snow and ice related, and it's average crashes per snow day per million VMT, or vehicle miles traveled. So what we're really trying to account for is as the county grows and we have more citizens living here, we have more people driving on the road, and then it obviously it makes a difference on how severe the winter is. So we look at any day that we bill cost to a snow removal cost code. There were 117 of those days in 23, and then engineering gives us a VMT number. And our goal is to stay below 1. You can see in 2014 at 0.93, and then in 23 we're down at 0.32. And I think that's representative of a good snow and ice control plan that's well executed by our staff. So we continue to monitor that, and we made some changes to our shifting here 2 years ago. So we added hours of service on the road. Countywide, we reduced some of the roads that we were running a night shift on. We removed those, but we were able to extend through the evening rush hour, where we used to come off the road at 6 o'clock in the evening. Now we're coming off the road at 8:30, and so we feel like that's had an impact and helped to keep the roads safer. So that's it. With any questions related to
I reckon we have a few questions. Yes,
reckon?
Commissioner.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd. And thank you and to your crew. You've been out in my neck of the woods or neighborhood county the last few weeks, and certainly still doing some operations as I mentioned, with the fire in the background. And so knowing, and watching this firsthand, I think actually the sweepers might be, have been out in front of my house this morning during a Zoom meeting. With the heat and extreme temperatures, above 100, and I was experiencing this on a state highway, it was 104, and I'm just curious, how does that change the longevity and the wear and tear and the resilience of the road and the wear and tear and even and also, I know we all care, and I know you're taking good care of those workers, but having them out there in that kind of heat, so a couple questions there. I've been thinking a lot about that because it's kind of, I've had a lot right out my front porch the last 2 weeks, let's put it
Sure.
that way.
Well, with respect to the actual work, chip seal or asphalt paving, the hotter the better. The materials like it when it's good and hot out. We don't, obviously you don't see us paving in the wintertime. A good 100-degree day is the best day to pave a road, unless you're the guy that's paving the road, because it's 100 degrees outside and the asphalt's at 350 degrees, and but that's the best day for the material itself to be placed. Chip seal's no different. It likes the heat. We get the oil sprayed, we get the rock dropped in it, and the way those emulsions work, the water evaporates out, and that's what sets the oil. So it likes the heat. The employees, obviously, it's been a hot summer. We try to provide shade and breaks and water and ice, and we pay for an ice a vendor to supply ice and water coolers that we keep in the field. But it's hot. It hasn't been enjoyable, I'm sure.
Well, that's great to learn about that. It's, the hotter the better.
Yeah.
And I figured, and I've seen them. They all seem smiling, but it seems like there's been a lot of activity. So, well, that's good to know. And then does the amount of traffic on the road, because I know you put up the sign saying no faster than 20, and I can attest that's not happening. People aren't paying attention. So how much does that impact kind of the how well this is able to set the curing of it or whatever? I don't know the term.
The traffic is good for it. The 20-mile-an-hour signs are really to protect windshields. So you have, when we drop aggregate into the oil, not every piece of rock sticks to the oil. So you'll see us spray oil, then we drop rock, and then the next operation is rubber tired rollers. So we're actually intentionally driving on it and pressing the rock, orienting the rock and getting it set down into the oil. Traffic helps us with that, so there's no detriment to traffic being on it. But there's always loose rock laying on the surface of the road. We won't sweep it till the next day. We need that oil to cure enough that we don't strip everything off with the brooms. So we sign the roads at 20 miles an hour. It's really a safety issue, and to prevent rock from flying and breaking windshields. I was out a couple days ago. We were on County Road 18, which is 402 east of the interstate, and I would agree with you. They're not driving 20 miles an hour, but that's the intent of the lowered speed limit. Once we get that next day, we will sweep all that loose aggregate off. And then within a few days, generally, then the last operation is the fog seal. That's a vendor that we have hired. They come in and spray a really low rate of emulsion one more time over the top, and that'll turn that road really good and black, and add a little bit more adhesion of the rock to the road. But the biggest thing we get out of that fog seal, and not everybody that does chip seal fog seals, but turning that road a really dark, deep black helps us in the wintertime with snow and ice control. The blacker that road is, the quicker it heats up with a little bit of sun on a good January day, and that helps us manage that in the wintertime. The striping shows up better on a really deep black road than it does on a gray road, which is the color of the aggregate that we're using. So
Thank you. I appreciate all your answers. Thanks for answering my questions.
You're welcome.
Well, thanks, Todd. And I'm really glad to hear that the changing in the schedule is helping with the snow removal, or the lowering the accidents that happen. We had talked about that before, and I'm glad to see those numbers going down. With regard to changing, getting 9 years out of life with the chip seal, do you think that there are particular roads that aren't going to be able to wait the 9 years, or you feel fairly confident that, I'm just thinking of roads that are, maybe more used or something like that. Do you feel like the 9 years will work for every road, or I guess it'll be a little bit of an experiment, or?
Yeah, chip seal's a little bit different because chip seal doesn't add any structure to the road. It doesn't help shape the road. It's really a mirror image of whatever we laid the chip seal on. So if the road was rutted or deformed, the chip seal road is also rutted and deformed. Really what we do with the chip seal, the oil creates a water barrier and protects the underlying pavement from moisture and sun, and then the rock adds some wearing surface. Really what ages chip seal is the oil. The sun gets to the oil and it'll cause it to become brittle. And once it becomes brittle, we start to shed aggregate. The traffic and the plows start to pop the aggregate out of the chip seal. And so we're thinking that at about 9 years, that's where that oil, that's about as much life as we can get out of the oil. And so I think in a roundabout way, my answer to your question is I think it'll work on all of the roads. I think there may be some subdivisions that are county maintained that we're chip sealing that are beyond their useful life now, and we're kind of gluing them together every 7 years. And so we're going to have to watch those, what happens at 9 years. But the reality is that we're somewhat giving folks false hope in those subdivisions. They really need to be, if we're at that point where we're just kind of gluing the little pieces back together every 7 years, it probably needs to be reconstructed or at a minimum overlaid. And so, we're starting to really more actively work with those subdivisions to get them hopefully into an improvement district and start making some of those improvements.
Because chip seal's all we would do in those subdivisions. We wouldn't ever.
We crack seal and chip seal.
Crack seal and chip
Yes.
seal. Okay.
Yep.
Well, I have certainly learned a lot today. I always learn a lot when I'm with you, Todd. So I feel like I understand a lot more about the work you do, and thank you. Thank you for explaining these metrics.
You're welcome.
I actually have a question or two. So regarding the road maintenance schedule that you've described that, we kind of have down pretty good, do we have enough money to do what you've described?
With
Well, the how you prioritize and whether it's gravel roads or unpaved roads. I mean, is there enough fund balance to do what needs to be done, in terms of what you just described? And I guess the corollary question to that, Todd, is if we had more money, what could we do better or differently, perhaps?
I think the answer is yes. The funding is appropriate, and I've spoken with the board in the past. The way we prioritize the revenue and expenses is we fund maintenance before we fund capital, with the understanding that we need to take care of the roads that are there now before we're funding additional square yards of pavement, turn lanes, intersections, and not that they're not important. That's where we're lacking funding, is on the capital project side. But we feel like we have to take care of what's on the road now. If we allow roads, if we shift priority and push more money into new infrastructure and allow the existing infrastructure to degrade, we push those roads over the critical PCI, where today we can maintain them in fictitious dollars, $1 to $2 a square yard. We pushed that to $5 to $6 a square yard because we allowed them to degrade to where a chip seal now isn't an appropriate maintenance option. So I'm going to answer your question with saying, yes, we're appropriately funded on the maintenance side with intent. When we build our budgets each year, we look at that. Now, that being said, our 25 budget, we made some cuts to dust suppressant where about 24 miles of road that has been treated in the past twice will only be treated once, and that was in an effort. We just can't. We know we need to make a minimum investment on the capital side, and inflation has outpaced revenue growth, and so in order to make that kind of draw that line in the sand and make that investment into capital, we needed to cut about $1 million out of the maintenance budget. So we held the overlay budget rather than growing it. We try to grow that budget each year to maintain with inflation. We didn't do that. We just held it at the 24 number. We're making this switch with chip seal. So if we have the same miles of road, right? But if we were only doing a ninth of it each year rather than a seventh of it, there's some savings there. And we made some cuts to dust suppressant. I think the one area that we've neglected to a point has been our drainage system. And it's not because we don't recognize what needs to be done. We've been severely understaffed, and we've been fighting that for a long time. And we've made adjustments in salaries. We've done. We're kind of at our wits' end with what do we do next. But what happens? That roadside drainage is something that will have an impact long term on the quality of the road surface, but maybe not today. So when we're short staffed and we have to set priorities with what are we going to do this week, those drainage crews get shut down and those employees get shifted to other crews to keep other priorities moving, and those crews get shifted more than others. So we made some notes in our budget submittal that we've held those line items that are related to drainage for a number of years now, not because we don't need to spend money there, but because we don't have people to spend the money. So we keep shifting them other places, but there will be a point where we're fully staffed and there's going to be some catch up to do with our drainage system.
Thank you. I think what you just explained is helpful as we consider decisions related to funding and how that relates to maintenance and capital improvement. Thank you. Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go back to the middle graphic, the average service conditions of paid roads, county roads. It says the goal is 75 to 85, but I noticed those last 4 points, they're in red, and I know probably you're trying to do that to show that it's trending down, but I also still feel you're above your goal. Is that maybe a different color, so it does, like yellow maybe?
Yeah.
So that because I still feel like you're reaching the goal. 91% is pretty, and even 88% is pretty decent. And I don't know, just for me, because if the public's watching, they're thinking, oh, there's a problem if it's in red. And I'm thinking maybe just because it's still above the goal. And
Sure.
I was just thinking that, to me, I had to look at that a few times thinking, okay, they're still above the goal. It's just that you're probably just signaling the trend is trending. So I'm just curious about your thoughts about that.
I think what we're trying to signal there is that we need to pay attention to that, right? We don't need a road system that's at 95, 99 PCI as an average throughout the system. So again, we've had a couple changes in inspection methods, one in 2016, one in 2020. But what that indicates is that we overall, our system is in better condition than what our goal is. And so we want to watch that. What that might mean is that we can shift some of those dollars other places. And again, I think a piece of that is this change to the chip seal program. And I think we're going to see those drop back down into that 75 to 85 band. But your point is well taken and appreciated that's not necessarily negative.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think in light of the time, we have two additional areas. Thank you for your information, sir. Now we get to talk about garbage.
Garbage, yes. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Dwayne Penny, Director of Solid Waste. We have 4 metrics that we use, and they all have a lot of value. And so I'll go through each one. The tons of waste entering the landfill, 346,000 tons. It's a little bit lower from the previous years. Last year we had a wet season. It started to rain in early May and it didn't quit until the end of July. And then we even had thunder boomers. So that impacts our disposal coming to the landfill because contractors can't get out and work jobs because of the mud and things like that. That's also a significant number. We track that to make sure that we do not run out of airspace at the Larimer County landfill, which, right now we're tracking to about January of 2026 before we're totally filled. And that still gives us a few months of, in the event we had an emergency or something like that. Also, we have a software system where we track every vehicle that comes into the landfill goes into a category, whether it's C&D, MSW, what type of vehicle. So that's real useful data that we can apply to a waste composition analysis, which helps us understand what's in the garbage. What are people throwing away? What can we divert? What can we recycle? What can we do better? And so there's a lot of useful information in that number. I think probably the last thing that's important is our trends are pretty standard, pretty normal year over year. Some of the interesting topics about that I'll share with you, when we look at the waste composition analysis, which is from 2016, we are going to do a new one here in the next year or so to update that, but we're still seeing about 58,000 materials that could be recycled going into the landfill. Just to give you a quick overview, cardboard, we're still seeing about 25,000 tons of cardboard going into the landfill. Quite a bit of different types of plastics. Plastics, there's not a lot of markets, and so we expect to see some of that until markets are developed. Still, I think the one that we're really working on now is metal, both ferrous and non-metal, or ferrous and non-ferrous. We're seeing about 15,000 tons of metal that we need to figure out how to get out of the landfill and recoup that. And then I think, some of the standard volumes that we're seeing, our yard waste is still around 48,000 tons. Food waste makes up for about 40,000 of that volume. Pretty big numbers. And then lastly, but certainly not least, the wood waste, both treated and clean, is about 70,000 tons. So those are waste materials that we're working on with diversion programs. And so I wanted to make sure and mention those because when we see that waste number, we dig into it and we spend a lot of time in those numbers trying to sort it out. Secondly, the household hazardous waste. Our facility, actually before I go, at the landfill, we get about 200,000 visitors a year come through the gates. The next one, household hazardous waste. We had a pretty good year, about 460 to 466,000 tons of hazardous waste materials, and we divided into 3 categories. We last year I was talking to you about the swap and drop, how during the COVID it dropped down to 12%, and last year it came back up significantly, and this past year is 29%. So that's really good. So what that means is materials that come in for disposal, we clean up, put back on the shelf in the swap and drop program, and they go back out the door to households. And so it gets reused. So pretty good method of diversion. Second part of that total number, we recycle about 57%, which is 261 of those 460 tons. And, you know, what really changed this year that impacted us is we were recycling batteries, both lithium, the different types of batteries, rechargeable batteries. We were charging those, or we were recycling those for free. Well, because Colorado, the state of Colorado didn't enforce a producer responsibility program, that recyclers started to charge us. And so now we're up to about, this year it's going to cost anywhere between $8,000 and $10,000 to recycle the batteries. And we're getting more and more batteries because of our battery campaign. Don't throw them in the landfill, it causes fires, and certainly in recycling centers, it causes fires. So we want to recycle those materials, but the costs are starting to drive up. We are working on different grant programs, and we are also working with the National Association of, it's a NAMA group that we're working with all the different counties in the state to, you know, develop a program to where we can work with the state to start to implement producer responsibility for not only just batteries, but hazardous waste. And so as we develop that, we'll get further down the road on that. That will be something we'll be able to talk in more depth probably next year, but we need to get some significant strides towards that. And then finally, the last part of the HHW is disposal of hazardous waste, and that's about 14%. And that gets incinerated, transported to other areas and incinerated. And some of the highlight materials that we recycle at the HHW is antifreeze, alkaline batteries, automotive batteries, lithium batteries, rechargeable batteries, fluorescent bulbs, latex paint. We are part of the paint care program with the state. That's a really big program, and we support it. So we take all of our paint. We make sure it's still good. It goes into containers and it goes to a company that the state hired to refurbish the paint, and then it gets reused. And that's a pretty significant drop in tonnage. So I'm glad to see that's getting recycled. And then used oil, propane tanks, and ink cartridges. Those are the things that we recycle. We do handle a lot of hazardous materials, aerosols, mercury, organic acid. Vape equipment is something that's really starting to become more and more at HHW. There's a lot of regulations that go with the vape equipment, and so we're working with the state to define those regulations even more. Because if the equipment was used with a substance, illegal substance, then we're not allowed to take it. And so it really gets challenging. And so we're working with the state on trying to define it so that we can handle those materials. And then another one that's starting to become pretty interesting is larger batteries, like e-bikes and those. So according to the regulations, we can handle rechargeable batteries that are less than 300 watt. Those batteries are more than that. And so we can't handle those batteries without a significant piece. So one battery costs $95 to recycle it. And so we're trying to figure out how to work with different groups. And I think this is where the producer's responsibility for a lot of this is going to really start to have impacts on how do we deal with this type of material. So that's HHW, that program. We're seeing averaging around 19,000 people a year. And then degradable waste, we talk about that each year. That's under the percent of municipal solid waste deposited at the landfill. definition of MSW is pretty much all waste generated from households, businesses, and institutions. So it covers a lot of waste. We track it because everything that's above the 72% is inert waste, and so there are no emissions. Everything from 72 down, we have to track our emissions through the air department, and we report that annually. And we keep pretty close tabs on that type of material. So organic waste is starting to become a really big challenge where the state is aggressively moving forward to try and figure out ways to help us keep organic waste materials out of the landfill. And CDPHE, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, put together a really good program on organic waste management, and they're really pushing compost facilities, anaerobic digestion, and different things like that to handle food waste. We support all of those, and those are all on our targets for the future facilities as well. I think probably the biggest thing is if we can reduce food waste from going into the landfill, that really reduces greenhouse gas emissions, which is something that the state is targeting big time now, as well as we are too. That's something that we work on. And to help our situation too, we're going to expand our gas collection system in the next year or two. So the entire landfill would be covered with methane gas collection system. And so we're going to see a significant increase in our collected CFM, cubic feet per minute. And that's going to allow us to be able to have more beneficial use opportunities. And then lastly, percent of municipal partners waste recycled. So that's the recycling center. But we stayed pretty flat. Truthfully, we stayed pretty flat on the recycling. We're not seeing a big uptick in that. I think what's going to be interesting is Fort Collins is going to a weekly recycling program starting in October with their single hauler program. And so we're not sure what we're going to expect. We're thinking the volume will probably stay about the same. Whether you collect weekly or 2 weekly, I'm not sure is going to change anything, but either way, anything to try and help the recycling. We did start a mattress program last year, and we had 173 tons, which is equivalent to just 7,000 mattresses in 6 months. So we'll hit 14,000 mattresses recycled this year, which we're pretty happy with that number. Everything else is staying about the same. We've diverted. So the way the state views recycling, and I get this question a lot, so it might be good to talk about it. How do we define recycling from diversion? Recycling is composting and recyclables that you run through like a material recovery plant. So just household recycling. So that's recycled. And then diversion, diversion is materials that you keep out of the landfill. So they are also diversion. Another waste stream that we're really tracking is industrial waste. That's asphalt, concrete, different types of wastewater treatment, sludge, things like that. And I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. I don't want to take up all the time.
Thank you. Very interesting. I need some input on how we're going to manage to be done close to 3 o'clock. It's 2:51. Any thoughts on that, Leslie? We have the ranch still, and I'm sure there are questions for Dwayne. Maybe we can do those offline or something.
Okay, well, what I would suggest, since we do have the ranch left, Connor has not been able to join us yet. What we can do is just fly through those metrics for the ranch, and then if there are follow-up questions, we may bring him back to a work session or follow up on those. So if you have further questions for Dwayne, now is probably a good time for that, since you have him in person.
Will somebody else present
I will present, yes.
the ranch? All right, let's try that. Colleagues, do you have any questions or feedback for Dwayne? Commissioner Stevens.
Okay, Dwayne, once again, I learned a lot, and I'm on the Solid Waste Council. So, first of all, I think it'd be great to add send some of this to our partners that have been on the council, with some of the the comments that you've made, because I think this is really great information for them to have and remind them of all the work that we're doing, but all the work that you're doing. So I'll just mention a couple things. It looks like maybe we need to push at the state level for more producer responsibility. Is that a state kind of situation? Because you said that there was a bill maybe that didn't go through around that. But I'm thinking about the cost of like recycling batteries. I mean, if we can get the producers to assume some of the responsibility for the recycling and of those products, that would probably be a good thing, right?
Yes, and we need to work with the different county agencies and cities and put together a package to take forward so that it can begin to get developed, and then we can begin to support that. Right now, it's just a broad general, but we need to get it more definitive, and then we can begin to put some policy behind it, and then begin to get like support from you guys.
Definitely. So we're happy to support in any way we can.
Okay.
With the expanded gas collection at the landfill, what will you use that for then?
Well, we're really excited about opportunities for that. With the increased gas, we're going to be up into the neighborhood of 500 to 600 cubic feet per minute. What that means is that we have more gas to do more with. And one of the things that we're evaluating is purchasing CNG trucks for our transfer station and treating the gas and using it as a fuel for our trucks. And then the remaining would go into a pipeline as a beneficial use or a supplement to natural gas. And it essentially can develop a revenue stream for the landfill. And so we're in the evaluation process of that. So we're pretty excited about that opportunity.
Okay. Thank you. Those were my questions.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Shaddock McNally.
Dwayne, thank you for all your expertise and a job well done. And I just really commend you for just amazing work and progress. It feels like we really are running an efficiently data-driven landfill, which is it's been just phenomenal and very interesting and educational for me in the last few years. So I appreciate your expertise and time. And I want to thank you for your work on the Bodie biomass study. It's really important to me on the Forest Health Council and as a commissioner. As the mitigation work we're doing, that's a big issue we've been talking about for years, and you've been very, very helpful. And I just wanted to say thank you, and I can't wait to present that to my partners across the state and see what we can do to do this mitigation work and be efficient with how we deal with that woody biomass. So thank you for your work there too.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I have questions, but given the time, I'm going to defer, so you're off the hook, although I'm hoping we have some kind of opportunity to interact with you more directly as we go forward with figuring out the complex puzzle of our solid waste management. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Leslie, you're on.
Okay, thank you, Commissioners. So the ranch is one of our facilities that is affected by community disasters and events that happen beyond the ranch. And so we have been employed this past week to help with some of the animals that have been evacuated. And Connor is I believe, tied up with that right now. So I will briefly cover the ranch items for you today. And then if you have follow-up questions or more information needed, we'll have Connor join you for that. So as you can see from the numbers here, we have some mixed results in terms of the facility utilization in the last year. And we are below our goal for the equine use rate in 2023 with the number that you can see there being at 30%. However, we're above our use rate for the other exhibition and meeting facilities. And so that's a little bit mixed, but I think generally trending upward from the time of COVID when almost everything took quite a downward trend. So we're seeing, year after year increases in a number of the activities at the ranch. The community events metric that you see in the middle also is increasing year after year since 2020 there. Part of the reason that the numbers are much lower than they were prior to 2020 also is in the types of events that we're now hosting that tend to be larger, and some methodology in terms of how we count the different events that happen in those different facilities. But I think you can see there that, we are heading upwards in the last couple of years, and so that's a very positive turn that we're seeing. Similarly, on the sponsorship revenue in the last several years, we've seen some significant increases there as well, and that's very helpful to our goal of achieving a facility that can pay its own way once we have the sales tax expire in 2039, and that's one of our major goals for the ranch facility. And then the last chart that you see there in the lower right corner, showing the operating expense covered by revenue, is slightly down over last year. I think that's one that Connor may have some insights as to why that trend is occurring, but it's not a significant downturn, and it's overall, I think we're seeing some increases from the 2021 timeframe as well. So those are the major numbers that we can show for the ranch. Connor has put in effect a quarterly report that he produces for the ranch, and that's something that we can share as well, and that provides a lot more in-depth information about the different activities that are happening out there as well. Are there particular things that you'd like to follow up on, and we can gather that information for
Anything
you?
come to mind for you?
Yeah, just, some more explanation around the equine numbers being that low as compared. I'm assuming that in 2020, the operating expenses covered by operating revenue was because we had the federal government doing the shots out there and they paid for that. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that dip seems the one that seems the most curious. So.
Yep. Okay.
Commissioner, anything?
Thank you for all this information, and big kudos to Connor for the last 2 weeks. I don't know if he slept between the rodeo and the fair and then everything else, so I just want to publicly thank him for his leadership, and the fair for all the volunteers has been amazing. When we talk about, so I could go on, I just sent him some nectar points, but I just curious about utilization rate and facility and the number of events. Sometimes with the number of events, when we talk about community events, are those the free ones or the reduced ones, the nonprofits or events that we're planning? And then are we also looking at some of those events are maybe bigger versus smaller? And I'm curious, that also is something we should maybe look at. There's maybe, I don't know, trying to dig down, because maybe some of these bigger events might be more of those are a bigger deal than the smaller ones. I just thought maybe we should maybe have a little more details on those. So
Yeah, and that's absolutely true, and I think Connor would be able to provide some very good insights on how we've changed how we're managing events at the ranch, trending more toward the larger events that span multiple days. And so those are, of course, then counted a little bit differently than maybe multiple small events that happen over the same period of time. So I think these numbers don't necessarily reflect the full story about what is happening with those events.
well, for example, I just learned today, which I'm going to crash the event. They've just had heads up at Foresters. We have the National Society of American Foresters coming to the ranch and the Embassy Suites for a few days. This is a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a huge deal. And I'm like, wow. And so I know when some of my favorite speakers are coming, so I'll be crashing, but hopefully they let me in. But I think that is a big deal. And so I think that one is a big event. So it's multiple days. So that maybe looks different than a 2-hour event. So just thoughts, and I congratulations. I'm really excited to hear about that event in September. So thanks.
Thank you. And as you point out too, I think the caliber of events that we're seeing at the ranch and for the community are also quite strong and increasing.
I would just offer, I think, can't get into specifics, just a deeper dive on all of these metrics. Different types of categories of community events. Are there some areas of operation where we're doing a better job of covering expenses with revenue? I mean, any type of breakout, I suppose, would be helpful, and perhaps more detail about, for all of these things, just a little more detail. So, thank you. Anything else, colleagues, or Brenda, you want to?
Thank you.
So we will adjourn at 3:02 p.m. And again, much gratitude to Matthew and the team that assembles all this and all of the hard work that you folks do. Take care.